afternoon, guys. I'm going to introduce Shweta, and she's going to present the last session of the day for this room. She is a technical architect, software engineer at Teradata, with more than a decade of experience in software design, development, and testing. She's currently focused on improving a single sign-on experience for developers and customers in future versions of Teradata, Vantage, which is a data analytics platform. In addition to her software engineering and leadership skills, Shweta co-founded Infinity, Infinity, okay, sorry for missing it, which teaches high school physics to high-achieving students and trains them to represent the United States in international physics contests. She will be presenting a talk titled "One Key Ring to Rule Them All: Unified Identity Management for Vantage." So please join me in welcoming Shweta.
Hello. All right. I know it's the tail end of the conference, so I'm not going to come in between your party and this presentation. So I'll try to make it a little quick, but yeah, we'll go through the presentation as we planned. So today I'm going to talk about unified identity and access management. I'm not going to be delving into much of the Teradata database itself, but the applications written on top of it and how we would provide identity and access management and what it means to provide this kind of a solution. So I'm just a brief introduction about myself. I'm a technical lead, and he just introduced myself too, but I am an architect in Teradata, and I've been working with Teradata a little more than 2 years. I have worked with various other companies like Qualcomm and worked in startup too. I moved up from client side, developing client side, to completely on the server side. And I also co-founded Infinity, which is actually a tutoring based services where, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Tutoring based services which teaches high school physics to high achieving students. And I'm proud to say that quite a few of our students have actually made it to the US team too. Little fun fact about my name, if you Google search me, you would actually not find me in the, hopefully you'll find it in the tail end, but she's a famous pop star in India, so you might not find me. Hopefully at some point I will reach up or rank up in my search. All right, today's agenda, I'm going to talk about API security and do some level setting of some background terminologies and concepts around API security, and why do we need single sign-on as an application or as a product, and some of the standard protocols which we have seen in the past. Of course, it's better to always use standard protocols wherever it's needed, and how we are also leveraging standard protocols to achieve these features, security features. And talk about the identity provider which we are using, and in general what industry-wide identity providers are there to achieve identity and access management. And finally, the key takeaways from this. Why API security? I think we have talked about this in the previous presentations too. My previous presenters also talked about API breaches or security breaches in general, right? There has been a lot of talk about failures. Let's talk a little bit about why these breaches happen. Let's take a second and think about in the last few years how many companies, big companies, have been in news. There's way too many in the list, right? Even if we limit the last 2 years, they are catastrophic and they are getting bigger and bigger. I don't just mean the list of the customers here. I also mean the type of the data which is getting breached. My favorite one here is Tinder. It's actually very surprising that they did not have any authentication in their API, which is kind of a really bad boo-boo, right? That means that you could actually send messages at somebody else. Is that a problem? Yes, it is. So you could, I mean, it's a silly use case, but you know, the gravity of the problem is really, really sad that the data breaches are just not affecting people. It's also affecting a lot of big companies and the name. The Equifax is the 800-pound gorilla here. I don't even want to talk about it because I don't want to end in a depressing note here, right? 1 out of 10 people out here have been breached by Equifax last year. So APIs get burnt. I mean, when you are having a digital transformation in your company, you have to make security your first concern. Panera Bread leaked 37 million customer records. Salesforce, they say that, hey, data was improperly shared when there was an API error. I mean, that's pretty sad. These are all public information. And you can go about search what has been the main problem behind it. The main problem behind it is the API. APIs were breached. Data leaks, I mean, are pervasive. I mean, the world is evolving right now, and companies are having digital transformation. Data is the heart of everything. At home, you use Alexa. There's ride sharing. These are powerful data. With powerful data and great access, there's more consumers' choice and power, right? However, security is the #1 concern. I mean, we have to make security, we have to left shift, I must say, right? You should not be the last thing to be considered. And in all these things, identity is the heart of the API security. No matter what, you need to know who is accessing your API and what access does that user have. Identity is the most important so that you can get a trail, you can get an audit that this user or this application or this software or this product has used me. So let's do some level setting. Let's talk about some of the terminologies, right? I've been talking about identity. Let's talk about what is entity versus identity, right? As a pure form, I'm an entity. I can speak, I can talk, I can read, I can teach. But to my colleagues, I mean, in my work, I'm a colleague. It's a perspective of my surrounding, right? It's how they perceive me as. At home, I'm a mom. At my tutoring service, I'm a teacher. And I'm also a classical Indian dancer to my friends who I actually professionally dance. So entity is just the pure form, and an identity is basically what you think or you perceive yourself or an application or a software in the perspective of the environment or the context. Another thing which a lot of people confuse is authentication and authorization. A lot of times I've gone into conversations with people, and there's always been a confusion, always, no matter what. Of course, if you are in this field for a long time, you know the differences. So what is authentication and what is authorization? Authentication means who you are, who as a person or who as an identity, who you are. And authorization is what you can access. Authentication can lead to authorization, but authorization cannot lead to authentication. Let's take a simple example. You're in a resort. You walk in, and you go to the kiosk. You show your driver's license and your family's. And that's what authentication is. Basically, you're coming into the kiosk, and you're identifying yourself as who you are. And he verifies, and everything is done, and he gives you a ring, a band. Your color band is different than your daughter's color, right? That means that she cannot enter a bar, or she cannot enter some place where she's not authorized. So that's a simple terms to understand what authentication and authorization is. If you understand this, then going forward, the protocols I talk about will make it a little bit clearer, or maybe make it a little bit muggier, because things have always been in this zone where authentication and authorization has been always overlapped in some way or the other. But things are much clearer now in future. So here are these 4 pillars, 4 elements, which are very important for API security. Authentication, I talked about. Authorization, to securing access control to your main resources. Throttling. Throttling is basically limiting the information flow, right? How you want to throttle your data. All these things can be achieved by an API gateway, if you have one. and throttling your API request as it comes in. Auditing, super important. You need an auditing log trail of what's going on. You need a monitoring, and you need to have a compliance. You need to make sure that who logged in, which application logged in, what software, which user in which application logged in, and all this information is so much important. Because when you go back and have an audit trail, you can actually show that, OK, this is what happened. Let's talk about the Teradata landscape here a little bit. Why we need this, right? Teradata is providing a data analytics platform called Vantage. It integrates with the Teradata DBMS. It's been there for 40 years with its Aster analytics capability, thereby enabling a wide variety of advanced techniques which could be used in analyzing data in speed and at scale. So the Vantage also integrates with analytic functions and engines, and it also integrates with third-party tools. Third-party tools like Jupyter, RStudio, these are all Visual Studios, Teradata Studios, Teradata App Center, and also languages like R, SQL, Python. So this product can be used for data analytics platform, and this needs to have applications on top of it, because people, our users or data scientists, will come back and write applications. And we need to provide single sign-on, which is one of the security features which we are providing. So the key strategies are API security, because there's a digital transformation happening. We are providing, each team is providing APIs. We need to make sure that APIs are secure, it's authenticated, and it has the right authorizations around it, or right access controls around it. We need to provide single sign-on. How cool it would be to have single sign-on all the way to the database. What do we mean by single sign-on? Single sign-on, you would have seen this example maybe in your corporate. When you log in, the first time you log in one place, and you got automatically logged in your SharePoint, in your Outlook. That's single sign-on in the enterprise level. If I have to do some data analytic functions, I have to log in into my Vantage environment. Then I have to log in to see how I can move my data. Then I log into Data Mover. If I have to look at my data, I log into Viewpoint. These are all applications which have been in top of Teradata database. I don't want to log in again and again and again, put my username and password, and just be about to be hacked, right? You need to be able to log in one place, one central location, and have access to all the applications. It's a side effect of your user experience, but there's a side effect that it's secured. How about MFA-enabled database? How cool would be that, right? These are key strategies. We don't provide that yet, but yes, that will be really cool if we have some place where we can do that. And of course, we have the whole set of people working on the whole developer experience, right? How the developer experience would be. These are key strategies, and security is one of the prime important factor for us when we actually go out with the Vantage platform. So single sign-on, right? There has been various protocols behind single sign-on. Let's look at a historical background. Let's get some history on the protocols which has been used. So when I talked about the enterprise level applications where you log into your laptop, and then you get logged into your Outlook, get logged into your SharePoint and other applications which is provided by the IT, they use SAML. SAML is Security Assertion Markup Language. And it's been there for quite some time, and it's been used by enterprises for single sign-on purposes. But one thing which is, it's a little heavyweight. It uses XML. Things have changed in the web world, and we moved on to REST-based API services. So things have been moving. The data has been transferred between the services in a different protocol called JSON, which is much lighter weight. So with the movement of, or with the improvement in the software, things have changed so much. They've come up with other protocols like OAuth and OpenID Connect. Let's take a step back and let's talk about OAuth, right? Why it actually came into the existence. So you might have seen Facebook long time back. I'm not sure, I might be dating myself, but when Facebook came, The only thing they wanted to know was, how many friends do you have, right? And I literally remember that there was one page where they literally asked for your username and password. You know why they did that? Off Gmail account, because Gmail is a place where you have all your friends, all your contacts. Hey, can you give me your username and password? I can actually integrate all your users and try to find friends for you, right? That feature which they provided was a very bad idea. You literally typing in your Gmail password, username and password, and they keeping that username and password, they could access your Gmail completely. Very, very bad idea. Not a good thing to do. So this actually was born. The OAuth protocol was born because of this reason. OAuth protocol was there to delegate access, to delegate that, hey, you are a second party or third party application. I want to delegate access to you and provide only some of the access controls, not all of my emails, right? Classic example is Twitter. Twitter has this application called Buffer or something, I don't remember, but you can actually schedule your Twitter tweets in certain time, and then it will let you send the tweet on a certain time. Literally, yeah, behind the scenes, they're using OAuth protocol. So OAuth is basically a delegation protocol which was born. But in that 2010 and 2013, around that time, or maybe 2006 and 2013, that time, they kind of had a gray area of like, hey, okay, I can provide you social login, and I can say, hey, do you want to log in using Facebook? Provide those kind of a feature, but they provided some kind of an authentication around it, and they confused the complete term about authentication and authorization. So OAuth was completely used for delegation. It's a delegation protocol, but ultimately you get this token back, which is the most important token for giving you access to the other applications which you have told to. So let's talk a little bit about the OAuth abstract flow. So what happens in the OAuth scenario is there are 4 real actors. One is the client, one is the resource owner, who is actually the owner of the API, one is the authorization server, and one is the resource server. Resource server is where you are actually vending all your data, right? That's where the resources reside. When I talk about resource, it could be an API, it could be anything else. So first, the authorization request goes and says, hey, I don't have any validation here. I don't know who you are. Can you put your username and password? That's a grant which comes back and says, hey, OK, I can put my username and password. Once that grant goes through, you finally, from the authorization server, you get back a token. This token gives information about what your access controls are, what the claims are, but it doesn't have any information of the user itself, like who logged in. So OAuth 2.0 protocol was meant for delegation, and there was no information of user, no information of how we can get the user info. So the client has absolutely no idea who the user was. So they came up with OpenID Control, OpenID Connect protocol, which just sits on top of OAuth protocol, which actually completes this whole puzzle. It gives back another token called ID token. Now, the ID token is what exactly tells us, hey, this is a user, and in fact, the OpenID spec also tells that you can actually get more information about the user using a user info endpoint. These are all standard. If you implement OpenID Connect protocol, you can actually implement the authentication and authorization flow in your APIs. So this token, which I was talking about, is the most important token of all. This gives you, there are 2 tokens actually. One is access token and one is ID token. The access token tells you what access you have and whether I have access to this API at all, or whether I have minimum access, or when I call, will I get the whole data, or will I get partial data and only certain aspects of the data. And the ID token tells you, hey, this is the user who has asked for this information. This is the user who is trying to access these resources, so they can have a trail of that. Now this token, obviously security is very important. This token needs to be signed and potentially encrypted because it needs to be secured. So the central place where this token is minted is where this token gets signed. When I mean signing, there's always an asymmetric key, a public key and a private key. The public key is the one which you can get saying that, hey, I want to validate the signature of the token. I got this token. Can I go and validate the signature of the token? Because I want to know whether it's coming from a trusted source, right? So with the public key, you can actually validate whether the token is valid or coming from a trusted source. The token is signed by a private key, and it's a gibberish. I mean, if you look at the token, it's gibberish. You won't understand what is there. But if you can see what it actually has, it has a couple of headers. It has a header, and it has a couple of claims in there. And this is called JSON Web Signature. And the token I was talking about is called JSON Web Token. So how do you verify? You verify using a public key and then validate that, hey, OK, this token is coming from a valid source. It's a trusted source. These are like a lot of things to take care, right? In API world or API security, you need to take care of single sign-on. You need to have federated identities because, hey, I have a customer who wants to connect to their LDAP, right? That's where my users are. I want to make sure that all my users, and I should be able to connect to the LDAP. Where would my users get validated? You don't want to store users' username and password. No, 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 no. That's the worst thing you want to do. But in the past, how people arrived at authentication was, hey, put the username and password. I'm going to save the password, and then I'm going to hash it in my database. Very bad idea, right? But we did that, right? I mean, I come from a different company which used to do that. But this is where, when you want to do your own authentication, you want multi-factor authentication, you want identity brokering, email verification, password policies, you want CAPTCHA, and all kinds of security around it. These are a lot of things. This is complicated. There's a lot of complications in modern authentication. Let's ask ourselves a question. Do we really want to implement these? It's a complex situation where security is really complex, right? How about delegating it, right? We are not in the business of doing security, doing identities, right? There are companies who have been doing this for years, and they are only dedicated to this. They're only dedicated to provide this functionality. We don't want to implement it. It doesn't make sense because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And people have been working on this for a long time. There are several industry-wide identity providers. There's Auth0, Ping Identity, Okta, Keycloak. Keycloak is the open source, and it's been provided by Red Hat, now IBM. So we thought about, hey, let's see how one of the identity providers work because Red Hat has been using their Keycloak for their SSO. So this is kind of an architecture what we have right now. So we connect to our trusted identity stores in the customer side. We can connect to any of them. We can connect to LDAP. We can connect to Office 365, Azure AD. And we have like an abstraction layer. We want to make sure that if in future we don't want to use that particular identity provider, we will probably want to have some kind of a broker or an abstract layer. And we have all the services which actually runs behind it. So what happens is when a particular service needs authentication, when an API call comes in, it goes through our API gateway, and then it says, hey, do I have a session? The first thing the API gateway says, no, you don't have a session. You need to go to the identity provider. So the call gets routed to the identity provider and says, hey, put in your username and password. That's the only time you will be putting your username and password. Single sign-on. So you put in your username and password. It doesn't get saved in Keycloak. It doesn't get saved in the identity provider. It goes and validates with the trusted identity stores, which could be LDAP in this case, for example, your Active Directory, right? That's where you have your username and passwords. That's where you can validate everything. It goes to LDAP and says, hey, this is the user. Is it the user, the right user who's coming in? Validates it, verifies it, comes back. That is authentication. That is authenticating that who you are is what you are saying, right? Once that part is done, it'll go back and say, hey, here, you have a session now. You can either get access to this API or you cannot get access. That access level control is a different entity, but has access control information in Keycloak, because everything comes from your LDAP, right? If you're part of this group, you are able to access these things. If you're part of this roles in this group, yes, you can access these things. So everything comes from your source of truth, who you are in the company, who you belong, where you belong in the groups in the company, and comes from the Active Directory. So yeah, this is kind of a solution which is obviously we don't want to be part of. We want to make sure that our security principles are all taken into consideration, and we have all. Keycloak actually provides all of them. And there are other companies in the market which has been in this forever, right? You want to make sure that you are using all kinds of security enablement when you're out in the wild to make sure that APIs are secured. It could be public, it could be private, but you need to make sure that there's no access in your system so that you don't have a data breach. So key takeaways are API security is not an afterthought. We need to left shift. We need to make sure that security is the first thing you take care of, and delegate as much as possible if it's not your prime business, right? If that is not your prime business, make sure that you have your everything in order for that to happen, because it's a complicated topic. Standards are very important. You as a product need to support the standards. And if you support the standards, you are able to seamlessly communicate with any product out there, right? If I want to implement authentication right now, I want to make sure that I actually support OpenID Connect. A lot of Active Directories do now, right? A lot of they support SAML, they support OpenID Connect. So SAML is still around, but the new kid in the block is OpenID Connect. Single sign-on is not just an experience. It's a great user experience. Yes, I don't want to type in my username and password, but there's a security and seamless integration too here. That's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions, anybody?
Right. So all these deployments, what we are trying to provide, it's on-premise and on-cloud in Azure and AWS. So we provide, in on-premise, these are all running in Kubernetes clusters. So we do provide the single sign-on capability with the Keycloak product integrated. We are not talking about enterprise applications, right? We are talking about the Vantage Platform, where data scientists can come in. Hey, I can log into my Vantage homepage and then get into whatever my Teradata Studio, or I get into Jupyter and then run my analytic functions and over there. So I don't want to log into Jupyter again. I don't want to log into Teradata Studio again. I don't want to log in back in again, or log into the database, which is the final leg where you have to run your analytic functions. So our database supports JWT, which is JOT. Our database supports LDAP, and also supports the traditional username and password. So, and our database also has access controls, which is embedded in database itself. But coming from an application perspective, we need to make sure that you're saying who you are, and you have access to whatever is there in the system, in the Vantage platform. So Keycloak is our key here, basically, the identity provider. Yes. Good question. I mean, we are trying to get to a developer experience. If you're talking, if I understood your question correct, we are trying to build this kind of a scripts. Hey, if you want to run this script to get this kind of analytic results, and this is a visualizations, there could be developers who have built this, and that there is a Git a repository where you can get samples and all of those things. So we are heading towards that. We haven't released that yet, but that's where the developer experience come into picture. Yes.
Great, thank you, Shweta.
Thank you.
And seriously, I have seen a lot of people interchangeably use authorization, authentication, encryption, tokenization so loosely. You know, the concepts are so unclear for a lot of people. And sometimes when I have a conversation with them, I have to go check my my knowledge again. Hey, do I know stuff? Because they are so interchangeably or loosely used that you do get confused. But I'm from Oracle background, and Oracle's doing a lot of this stuff. And it's interesting, to learn a lot about Teradata and how they're managing single sign-on at a database level.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's not always good to have homegrown, right? I mean, yeah, otherwise you really, it's kind of like build versus buy, right? What do I do? Am I my strength is in security or in like application security, or my strength is in analytics, providing the analytics functionality, right? So you have to you do that balance. But yes, authentication, authorization, yes, there is. I think industry has confused a lot too, right? The OAuth protocol has been there for a long time, and people have confused that OAuth, the authorization part, yes, that's where because it could do both authentication in a loose term, because you're authenticated and getting authorized, so it's like very confusing, yes, yeah.
And more so, because a lot of organizations have on-premise applications as well as cloud applications, and that's where the confusion just goes, multiple fold. People don't understand security. Really, they don't understand security, according to my opinion. You've got to get the best in the industry, sit with the CIO or CISO and tell them we're just one ransomware hack away.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody has any questions?
Thank you for stopping by. I guess now I'm done with your part. Like, go ahead and do the party. Thank you.